Hey everyone, Scott here to discuss the 2025 version of The Naked Gun, starring Liam Neeson, Pamela Anderson, Paul Walter Hauser, Kevin Durant, C.C.H. Pounder, and Danny Houston, directed by Akiva Schaffer. Now, did I laugh at all during this movie after the last one? Let's see about that. Let's get into this movie. We open in a bank robbery where a police squad member named Detective Lieutenant Frank Drebin Jr., played this time by Liam Neeson, is disguised as a little girl to stop the robbers, except for Sig Gustafsson, played by Kevin Durand, as he got away with getting a plot device from Richard Kane, played by Danny Houston. While Frank fights in the most slapstick way possible, which made me laugh and save all the hostages while showing his underwear, which was hilarious as he stopped 1,000 bad guys. And his boss Chief Davis, played by C.C.H. Pounder, calls Frank and Ed Hawkins Jr., played by Paul Walter Hauser, to get them out of bank robberies, and sends them to Beverly Hills while Frank and Ed talk to their dead dads, while Nordberg's son decides not to talk to his father, which was funny because of what happened to O.J. Simpson, in real life. And that's something I'm not going to get into. And they get into a car in the pond. They get to a car in the pond, to get it out of there, and find a piece of matchbook information of Beth Davenport, played by Pamela Anderson's brother Simon. And I enjoy Liam Neeson taking over the role from Leslie Nielsen, as he's just as funny as Leslie Nielsen was. Frank meets Beth in his office as she's led to believe Simon was murdered by a man named Richard Kane, whom he worked for. And the performances by Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson was hilarious throughout the movie, as everyone should know not to take this movie seriously. As Frank meets Richard and asks about Simon and his death, and Frank asks Richard about the case, as Richard shows Frank around the place and sees the matchbook from the crime scene a few minutes ago. And the editing is super tight in this movie for an 85-minute movie, as Frank gets a car from Richard, which is working great for comedic purposes. Frank interrogates a man who was arrested for manslaughter, as he was at the robbery while seeing the footage of Frank needing the restroom desperately after eating a chili dog, which made me laugh so damn hard, as he confesses they need a safe deposit box from Simon, while Richard is in a meeting with some people, as Danny Houston does a good job of portraying a villain, even in a comedy, as he talks about his evil plot while celebrating with Weird Al Yankovic, performing for the Evil Billionaires, while Frank drives in his sleep, which is pretty freaking dangerous, while he goes in a club and asks for a man who's a bartender if he sees Simon around, and he sees Beth, and same to Richard, as Beth is in love with Frank, and their chemistry was very good in my opinion. Frank gets to see camera footage and beats up some henchmen, while Beth sits in the table with Richard, whom she's led to believe is the bad guy, and goes by a different identity, and she sings for a song for Richard, and she sings like an exotic singer, which was kind of annoying after a while, as Chief Davis gets the news from Frank while trying not to wake her husband's ass up, which was a tad tedious, while Beth appears in the dark like in a noir movie. And that shot was clever, as the shots are clever throughout the movie, as she enters Frank's apartment and he says his wife died some time ago, as we'll never go through it ever again. But I don't care, as this is a better comedy than any of the R-rated stuff for the past 15 years. We get images like from Austin Powers, where Sig gets the wrong idea while they're cleaning up an oven versus seeing a doggy, and they start to kiss and pretend to be in a cold place to spend their time in the honeymoon cabin and create a frosty that I swear I thought Seth MacFarlane, who's the producer of this movie, was going to voice, but it turns out he didn't have a voice. But he turns out like a violent Jack Frost, like that horror movie, for example. And that was a funny moment of the film, as it was all in his imagination. And we get back to Los Angeles, and he gets to Douglas O'Reilly's apartment and frames himself like on the evidence and saying he did it. And I thought he was in trouble by the law, as Frank, like his father, is an idiot. Well, not literally, but you know what I mean. As Richard drives the car by control and almost gets Frank killed, but he makes it out alive by jumping out of it, which felt convenient, as Ed says police squad is closed down because of Frank himself, and the action sequence was fun in a comedic way. Beth says to Frank to find a way to stop a device from performing an explosion, as all of season 1 of Buffy the Vampire Slayer is gone from his TiVo, and Ed gets information on Sig, and they capture him and get a confession out of him about the WWFC on New Year's Eve, and Frank is almost arrested by the members of the Internal Affairs, and they have less than 50 minutes till midnight, and we get to the stadium of the WWFC while Frank and Ed happen to be there, as is Beth, when she's going to kill Richard, as Frank comes in and Ed works at a bar and hands out free beer. And everyone, even minors, I thought, really went that, because that was stupid. But this movie's supposed to be stupid. What's the point? Frank gets down with the New Year's Eve ball and shows his underwear as it's on the TV, which is embarrassing for him, and he puts his pants on after beating up the microphone man, as Richard takes Beth as a hostage, and Richard triggers people to fight one another as he escapes, and Frank tries to stop what he wants, and he gets away while he believes Beth will be dead by the next morning, and Richard triggers people to go after Frank as he beats them up with guns, as he doesn't kill people, he just hits them with the gun. And that's good slapstick, while Frank sees his father as an owl to catch Richard and flies like an Harry Potter, for example, as Frank catches Richard by making the owl dumping on Richard's helmet, and Dave Bautista confronts Richard until Frank finishes up in the restroom, and for some miraculous reason, Frank hits Richard in the softest part of his stomach. And Richard almost flies away, but he crashes with Frank, arresting him, with Beth almost killing Richard, but Frank talks her out of it and gives the gun to Frank, which felt like a cliche, and Beth turns off the trigger as people love each other again, and they save the world as credits roll to a mid-credits scene of Frank and Beth on vacation together and punching the life out of the audience as the police squad is back in business. And after the credits, Weird Al Yankovic performs the bad guys, and there's no one there, and the climax was good, but not the best thing about the series. But by how much? Let's talk about it in a rating. I'll give this movie a 6.8 out of 10. Slightly not as good and funny as the original movie, as this cracked me up, as Liam Neeson taking over the role from Leslie Nielsen because he passed away, may he rest in peace, as he's just as funny as Nielsen was all those years ago, and the performances by Liam Neeson and Pamela Anderson was hilarious throughout the movie, as they have chemistry together. And everyone should know this movie doesn't take itself too seriously. So do yourselves a favor, don't take it too seriously, sit in there, have a good time. The editing is super tight for an 85-minute movie, and the movie is working great for comedic purposes, as Danny Huston does a good job at playing villains, and even in comedies, while Pamela Anderson singing is kind of annoying after a while, as the shots were clever throughout the movie. This is a better comedy than any of the R-rated stuff for the last 15 years, and the action sequence was fun in a comedic way, as this is a recommendation for this movie, as it made me laugh like the original, and the climax was good, but not the best thing about the series, but it works. So I'd like to thank you guys for joining me for this Naked Gun retrospective, and until if we ever get another one,